All right, welcome to the second episode of A Star Was Born. I'm here with my son Mark, and today will be about origin story. So all good stories have an origin story. Your mom and I last week saw Supergirl, and they threw her origin story in the movie. So I thought today would be a good one to throw my origin story. So, what was your question?
So, what's your origin story with the Marshal Service?
All right. So I grew up in Chattanooga. Never grew up wanting to be in law enforcement. That was not on my radar. I did get a taste of law enforcement in the ninth grade at Brainerd Junior High, which was a three-level school. We had in the ninth grade, I was a patrol boy, and I had two jobs as a patrol boy at Brainerd Junior High in the fall in 1972-73 school year. One was to raise the flag at the start of the school day and bring it back down, and I learned how to fold the American flag. My partner and I did. And the other job was to make sure kids did not run in the hallways or skip steps. Okay, so we'd usually be posted at one of the stairwells. There were three stories, so there was a landing, and so we'd be at one of the stairwells. And usually we didn't have too many problems, but there was this one guy. He was in my class named Eric Lambert, and Eric, he was a friendly guy, but he liked messing with me. So Eric would see me when he was coming by going to class. He would see me, and he would walk, and I'd remind him. I said, "No skipping steps." He'd get like two steps from the top, turn around, look at me, grin, skip the last step, and take off down the hall. So I'd have to chase him down, take him back, make him walk back down the steps. That was like a weekly ritual. I dealt with that. So that was my taste of law enforcement. Now, we had a little badge. It's kind of like this. That's why I brought this one. This is just a generic security badge. We had a badge, and we wore a white sash across that the badge was on. And of course, we left him at school. So anyway, that was my law enforcement career at ninth grade. And so get out of high school, go to Chattanooga, and was a political science major. Thought I wanted to go to law school, but after too much fun at the Sigma Chi house there at Chattanooga, I realized law school wasn't going to happen. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. My last year of college, I worked at a restaurant called the Hungry Fisherman Seafood Restaurant. It was a full service seafood restaurant. They had them around the southeast. Some of you guys watching this might remember them. The Red Lobster was our main competitor. But we had a lake, we had paddle boats, we fed catfish. It was pretty cool. And I was getting ready to graduate. I worked there my last year, got six of my buddies' jobs there. And my boss said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" This was the summer of 1981. "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, you need to be a manager with us." So he got me a couple of interviews. They ended up hiring me right. I started the day as a manager the day after Thanksgiving, 1981. And they put me in a hotel in Marietta, Georgia, about an hour and a half south of Chattanooga. And I trained, and then I became an assistant manager at the Marietta store. After 6 months, they transferred me to Stone Mountain, Georgia, on the east side of Atlanta. That's where I met Ryan and Matt's mama, Nancy. She worked there. The so I was there. I'd been there for about 6 months. Early 1983, my sister Tanya calls me, and she was a criminal justice major at Chattanooga. And she called me. She said, "Hey, I'm doing an internship with the U.S. Marshals. So they're getting ready to hire. Said it might be something you might like to do." And I said, "Well, I don't know what they do, but it's got to be better than what I'm doing." So I decided to apply. I knew I had to, so I had to go down to the federal building downtown Atlanta and turn in a slip to take the test to be a deputy U.S. Marshal. Of course, I put stuff off, just like these videos or the book or whatever. It turned out that the day I took this went down to the Office of Personnel Management to turn the slip in, I got there about 11:45 in the morning. just kind of got up leisurely. I was off work that day. Turned out that day the office closed at noon. If I'd have been there 16 minutes later, I never would have been a deputy marshal. I got it turned in right in time. About a month later, or 2 months later, early 1983, still, I went to take the civil service test. Now, the test was just a basic civil service test. It was not law enforcement specific or anything like that. I'm in the room, look around at all these people taking the test. There's about 45,000 people that took it nationwide that spring or that winter. I look around the room and I thought, man, I got this. I figured I could do well on this. Well, I did. I made a 96 on the test. When they interviewed people, they started with the top scores and worked their way down. So a couple of months after I took the test, I got called down to the marshal's office in Atlanta to be interviewed. I put my best suit on, didn't have many back then. I'm talking to Marshal Lynn Duncan, who was the U.S. Marshal, presidential appointed U.S. Marshal in Atlanta. Larry Burns, I believe, was on the interview. He was a supervisor there, and I cannot remember the third person. It was a three-person interview. I was sitting in the marshal's office. They were all over here. I was sitting in a chair, and they went through the questions, and I did all right. And before they interviewed me, I had to write out an essay. Why do you want to be a deputy U.S. Marshal? So I wrote it out. I was always a good writer. I figured no problem, right? So we go through the interview. During the interview, they asked me, if I had my choice of Detroit, Chicago, or Los Angeles, where would I want to work? Now, this Southern boy said, well, I don't want to go to Chicago or Detroit. So I said Los Angeles. I later found out when I ended up working for Marshal Duncan in the late 80s that they were going to recommend wherever I said. So I ended up on the West Coast, which was good. But the last thing I never will forget, the last thing they asked me, Tommy, how do you spell Marshall? And I spelled it with two L's at the end. It's spelled with one L at the end. They had a good laugh at my expense. I walked out of the room thinking, man, I blew that. But obviously I didn't. Then I get notified I had to get a physical. So I couldn't find the form yet, but it was a long form. I had to type it with a manual typewriter. We didn't have whiteout back then. You had to kind of autocorrect or whatever we did, and typed out this long form for the application part. And then I had forms to take to the physical. So I didn't really have a doctor because I was young and healthy. So I found a doctor and said, I need this work physical. And it had all the requirements. So he gave me all the requirements, including a vision test. But for the vision test, instead of a machine, now this was in 1983, he actually opened this old book and it had pictures in it. And I had to trace the lines, for color blindness, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I passed it. I get notified in the fall with a tentative offer of a job in it said anywhere in the U.S. So I was talking to Nancy, my wife, and the job was, I got hired in as a GS5 level deputy, which paid back then about $14,000 a year, which was not a lot even back then. Of course, it's a lot less now, but it wasn't a lot. I was making about 16,000 at the restaurant. Okay, but I was working about 80 or 90 hours a week. I had one day off a week, and once a month I got 2 days off in the middle of the week, working all weekends. And I wanted to take the job. I knew it would be a short-term uh, decrease in salary, but in the long term it should pay off. Well, she was against me taking it. She said, we can't afford to move to California. We were living in the Atlanta area. You can't afford to take a pay cut. So then I get my final offer right before Thanksgiving, and it was for San Diego, California. So that's where we knew we were going to San Diego and all that. So Thanksgiving, I'm off work, and I go to my parents' house in Chattanooga for Thanksgiving. And I'm telling my dad that, well, I might not take this job. I might just have to pass. And they convened what they referred to until the day they all died, all four of them. And I'll tell you who they are in a second. They called themselves the Council of Elders. They took me into the kitchen, around the Formica table at their house there in Chattanooga on Spring Garden Lane, and said, look, you would be an idiot not to take this job. That's what they told me. It was my dad, Eddie Stork, my stepdad, who raised me, my uncle, Bobby David, that was his brother-in-law. It was my uncle, Bill Miller, which was my mom's brother, and Jim Hatfield, who was a lifelong childhood friend of my dad's. They called themselves the Council of Elders, and they told me, you better take the job. So the council, and my dad told me, he said, I'll help. We'll give you some money to help you move, because we're going to have to pay our move to California, which is 2,000 miles away. And he said, we'll help you, and so I took it over Nancy's objections, I would say. It didn't. Anyway, I did it. My first day with the Marshals was December 27th of 1983. Never forget, because I had worked it out with the Hungry Fishermen. I went off their payroll on Sunday, and I was started on the Marshals the next day. It was right after Christmas. We were closed for Christmas, and Christmas would have been on Sunday that year, right? Monday, we had to do inventory and all that kind of stuff. So I told them, I said, if you give me Saturday off, Christmas Eve, I will come in Monday on my own time and work one more day. So I worked free on Monday, December 26th for the Marshals. For the Hungry Fishermen. As I recall, I worked till about 1:30 in the morning, winding everything up. I was an assistant manager, but we had to do inventory, had lots of stuff to do. And then I showed up at Atlanta, Marshal's office downtown Atlanta, later that morning, about 8 in the morning, to get sworn in as a Deputy U.S. Marshal. As you can see, there was it all worked out. It just all worked out. And we'll get into the rest of the story as we go along, including a lot of these adventures. I want to show you a couple things before we go. All right. So I showed you a G.I. Joe U.S. Marshal in the first episode. This is a Deputy U.S. Marshal. And I found him in a toy store. Can you see him on the screen? Yep. And so I found him in a toy store. And obviously he's an old Western guy coming through the saloon doors shooting. My cousin Lisa, Zarzar, both gave me this a long, long time ago. And he's just been sitting around. And then, as you can see behind me, I collect books. I've got more than you can see in this video. And I love books. It's a pain when you move. I'll tell you, if you collect books, it's a pain when you move. It really is. But I thought I'd show you a book. I've got some about the Marshal Service. I got some written by friends about the Marshal Service or DEA or just life in general that I'll share with you as we go through all these episodes. But this one right here, we had our 250th anniversary not too long ago, a few days ago. When I was your age, Mark, we had our 200th anniversary. So I was a bicentennial high school guy. We had red, white, and blue tassels on our cap and gowns. The Marshals started in 1789 when they passed the Federal Judiciary Act. So for the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Marshals, the Marshals historian Ted Calhoun wrote a book about the history of the Marshals from 1789 to 1989. And so here's the book right here. And it's a pretty good read. And I would suggest, if you're interested in the Marshal Service, this would be worth getting. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or whatever.
What's the book called?
I should have said that. Good question. The book is called The Lawmen. United States Marshals and their deputies, 1789 to 1989. It's written by Frederick S. Calhoun. We knew him as Ted Calhoun, and he was a great historian for the U.S. Marshals. So that's about it for this episode. Like I said, I love a good origin story. I've got some books behind me with the some Marvel origin stories, DC origin stories. So this is the USMS, the Marshal Service. This is my origin story, and as we go along, every deputy that I ever worked with had a unique origin story, and we all had unique careers. And that's what we're going to share as we keep going from the time when I can say, oh, almost forgot. Your brother Ryan reminded me after watching the first episode that I need to say, hey, if you like it, hit like, hit subscribe. There'll be lots of these, so please hit like and subscribe to encourage me and to keep Ryan off my back too. But as we go along, as I go, I just want to say that there's a lot more to come from a time when I can say a star was born.